Good morning, everyone. And since you're on time, let's get started. My name is John Bacon. I'm the board president of HDC and want to welcome everyone this morning. And I assume some more folks will trickle in from the rain. And I apologize, but I biked here and didn't realize it was actually raining, so I'm a little damp. There's my sticker. But welcome, everyone. And I just wondered if all my fellow directors and advisors could raise their hands so folks know. So come to us if you have any questions about HDC, although most of the people in this room work with us closely already. But if you have any questions, please let us know. Look forward to this morning's conference, as always, and look for related tours throughout the summer and even a little bit later, perhaps, as things go. And I think without further ado, and I should have also said our wonderful staff is here. You met some downstairs. A couple upstairs, and I will now introduce Frampton, who will get us underway, our executive director. So thank you very much for coming and enjoy the conference.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you all today. I'm Frampton Tolbert, the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council, so pleased to have you here today. As most of you already know, the Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. We work to preserve cultural, historical, and architecturally significant neighborhoods and work with over 500 community organizations across the city. Our conference each year looks at pressing issues and emerging trends in historic preservation. So this year, we're looking beyond the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is a really big focus of our organization, to sites of public art, memorials, cultural sites, and other places that aren't always considered when we think of preservation. We decided to choose this topic for several reasons. In the past few years, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, as you may know, has started increasingly designating sites of cultural significance. This year, they designated the Lesbian Herstory Archives and Park Slope. Last year, they designated the Kim Lowell Square War Memorial in Chinatown. And in early June, they are going to be considering the residents of Dizzy Gillespie in Corona and Duke Ellington in Harlem for landmark designation. But there's still a lot that the LPC cannot or will not designate. And how does landmarking actually protect cultural significance? This year, we're also working with Six to Celebrate partners, our priority neighborhoods, who are focusing on significant places like we are going to talk about today. Our partner, Friends of Mosholu Parkland in the Bronx, are interested in raising awareness about the War Memorial on the Parkway. And the Garifuna Coalition, which is based primarily in the South Bronx, has an incredibly important memorial in their community, the Happy Land Memorial, which is dedicated to 87 people, almost all from the Garifuna community, who lost their lives in the Happy Land social fire in 1990. So how are these places acknowledged and preserved for the future? Our speakers today will address that through the work they are doing online and on the ground to research, document, commemorate, restore, and celebrate these types of places. And there's no better way to kick off things off than with our keynote, Jonathan Kuhn, Director of Art and Antiquities for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. But before I introduce him, I want to make a few announcements. First, I want to thank our funders, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature. Additionally, additional support is provided by the New York City Council members Eric Botcher, Gail Brewer, Christopher Marte, Keith Powers, and Lincoln Ressler. Next, I want to thank HDC staff for helping put today's program on: Diego Raballo, Lucy Levine, Helen Freeman, and Michelle Arbalou. I hope you all will chat with them today. And of course, thanks to our board for their support and attendance, and some of them for serving as our moderators. If you need AIA credit, please check in at the front desk. We'll also have a survey at the end of the day that I hope you will fill out to help us improve our programming. And as John mentioned, over the next month, we'll have tours on the conference theme, including a tour of food history on Arthur Avenue, Lower Manhattan's African Burial Ground, public art at Rockefeller Center, and community murals in East Harlem. And finally, you can save the date for our Outdoor Grassroots Preservation Awards on June 13th. And with that, let's start our discussion. We start today with a keynote presentation by Jonathan Kuhn, a 36-year veteran of New York City Parks and Recreation. Jonathan Kuhn has served as its Director of Art and Antiquities since 1995 and oversees the placement, display, and care of permanent and temporary art and monuments in the city's parks. In 1997, he founded New York City Parks' Citywide Monuments Conservation Program. He has curated more than 30 exhibitions on the history of parks in New York and has authored the catalog, The Outdoor Gallery, 40 Years of Public Art in New York City's Parks, the guide, Historic Houses in New York City's Parks, as well as more than 24 entries in the Encyclopedia of New York City. He is presently planning the exhibition After the Ribbon is Cut, Re-examining New York City's Park Monuments. So with that, I will introduce Jonathan.
Just get all my junk laid out here, and thank you. I'm glad to see a couple of our monuments on the flyer there. The Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch, a city landmark, which just got scaffolded this week. I was there earlier, and the on Moshlu Parkway that was mentioned, the War Memorial, where my staff was doing maintenance this week. So kudos to them. I noticed the flyer said something about talk, film, and much more. I'm going to bring out the much more first. This is all there is. Worst case scenario. I'm going to pass this around and it can circulate. It's got heft to it. It's a bent bayonet. We don't know where it came from because we have all of our bayonets intact, so it must have been replicated some time ago, but it sits as a reminder to me of things to be done and the worst things that can happen with our monuments. Now, let me see if I can get this technology going here. Frampton, and thank you for having me. I don't see the on the screen. Oh, somebody's coming up to get the presentations up, and then we're going to start. I'm going to start with a little, just a fun bit of film, vintage film, to get you warmed up for this day's proceedings. Okay, so where am I going? Okay. All right. So without further ado, here we go. There you go. Nobody liked Chaplin. Okay, and I'm looking for mine. Okay. Well, nothing like Chaplin to make a point about the pomposity of our best intentions. Prosperity and progress. That's from City Lights. That's the opening scene from City Lights, one of the great all-time films. And the point, the reason I show it, besides giving you a little laugh early in the morning on a rainy Saturday, is the concern that we have at Parks, and I think we all do, how do we perpetuate memory? And especially, I work in the world of monuments and memorials in cities' parks. It's a rather specific world. Some of its lessons apply elsewhere, but some do not. But what this concerns me is the enormous energy that goes into the creation of a memorial or monument that often takes years to conceive and realize, and yet the dissipation of that energy almost instantly after the second that veil is lifted or that ribbon is cut. And it's that disconnection, that chasm almost between intent and result. It's a fact of it that once that veil comes off or that ribbon is cut, there's a loss of control. The artist and the sponsors, they're no longer controlling that project. It's been received into the public realm, and it may be perceived or misperceived in numerous ways. It may be derided. It may become overly familiar. It may become background noise. It may become embraced in ways never intended by the artist or the sponsors. But that kind of trajectory of the monument it's just beginning when the ribbon is cut. And yet so much of the energies that we put into the creation, and very little thought often about the outcome and the long-term impact that object will have on our sensibilities and how do we care for it. And that's the world in which I live in at Parks, in which I'm going to try and let's pull this up. And let me get full screen, hold on. Talk to you about this morning. I remember just a few years ago, David Dunlap, the great journalist for the Times, he did a lot of feature pieces in the preservation world. Many of you probably know him. He was covering a story of our staff was taking care of a large monument inherited from the World's Fair in Flushing Meadow called Freedom of the Human Spirit, and by Marshall Fredericks. And we were diligently repatining it and removing corrosion and waxing it. And he sort of looked at me, it's like, it's not that great, is it? Or what? Why are you doing this? And I sort of took an intake of breath, and then I responded, I'm going to quote myself, quoted in the New York Times. I said, our responsibilities as custodians transcend our aesthetic proclivities. And then I went on to say, quote, from that article, quoting myself, we call it an outdoor museum, but often the distinction between us and a museum is that we can't cycle pieces in and out. They largely stay in place while the world and aesthetic taste change around them. And that's just it. We don't have that luxury. These pieces are there for as close to eternity as our culture has. And so how do we both maintain memory and how do we preserve the object? It becomes the focus of our endeavors at Parks on a daily basis in a very rough city sometimes. So here we go. So just on the front, 3 icons from the collection: Washington, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Frederick Douglass. We posited in our world that this is an outdoor museum. This is a way of according a respect for the collection, but also sort of organizing our thoughts. What does a museum do? It acquires work. It then tracks that work through the registrar's office. It then uses that work to make points and send messages and aesthetic messages and historical messages through the curatorial programs. It cares for things through the conservation lab. It has guards. We don't, except mildly so, the Parks Enforcement Patrol, who never can be at all places at once. And then it educates people. We have a lot of content on our website, for instance. And so the world, again, that I live in mainly is the conservation lab, or the preservation lab, we might call it. Because how can we maintain memory and preserve memory if we haven't preserved the object in the way it was intended to be seen? And so that's our first and foremost primary goal at parks is to do that. The collection's about 800 sites, about 300 sculptures. By the way, since so much is made of this, only about 135 of those sculptures represent actual people. And some of them are repeats like Washington and Columbus, so only 118 persons in totality. It's been crowdsourced, the collection. 98% of that collection was paid for through private funds, often through the crowdsourcing term of the old days was popular subscription. An entity would form to create a memorial. They would approach the city. They'd ask, we'd like to do this idea. They had this idea, like the folks in the Chaplin movie. And then they would go out and they would get people to pay from the community, $1 here, $5 here, sometimes more. They didn't write out big checks and largely it was sort of Bernie Sanders style, collecting money in small amounts that created large amounts to commission these monuments. And so people were literally invested, besides vested in their projects in their communities. About an eighth of the collection is World War I monuments. Somebody was mentioning to the Mosholu Parkway monument. It's part of that district that the HDC is celebrating, and they might wish to add inscriptions to other wars. But in fact, what's happened with the World War I monuments is that they've come to represent all wars. We can't sort of continue to put hundreds of things out. And so, and as a matter of ethics, we often don't alter an existing historical monument. But so here's some pictures of dedications, that energy, that massive energy, that sort of cathartic thing with the unveilings and ribbon cuttings. Upper left, you have soldiers and sailors, the Dawn of Glory in Highland Park. Upper right was the biggest event I ever worked on. It was the Eleanor Roosevelt Monument. 8,000 people were there. And in the center, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man sculpture by Elizabeth Catlett, Brooklyn War Memorial, lower right, and lower left, a monument that's been one of the few we've ever removed from the collection, the monument to Dr. Marion Sims, when it was moved from Bryant Park to the 103rd Street and Fifth Avenue opposite the New York Academy of Medicine. Two other recent dedications, the Flight 587 Memorial and the Sun Yat-sen in Chinatown, and one honoring the predominantly Dominican community in the tragedy of the airline that went down in the Rockaways just after 9/11, and the other in the heart of Chinatown, honoring a Chinese independence leader. I was looking at these slides and realized there's a certain practical issue we have at our own unit, in that Sun Yat-sen was born on November 12th in 1911. Born in 1911, and the independence movement, and the Flight 587 went down on November 12th. So we have to make sure these two monuments are they're both mayoral events, and it's the day after Veterans Day. So every year there's sort of a crunch time on this, just through random historical circumstances of the calendar. But these events have pageantry and pathos and pride, and yet again, often that dissipates. Though in the short run, you'll see annual ceremonies and then they'll trail off, or the veterans monuments, they'll die out, and the living links are detached from the object. And how do we sustain that energy through various means? Collection has old things like the Egyptian obelisk and the column of Jerash, a Roman column from the country of Jordan, a vestige of the World's Fair. It is contemporary art, things that aren't monuments per se, works of art that says Louise Nevelson's Night Presence, Forum Park Avenue, or Brian Hunt Coente's Ship. Our oldest monument would have been the King George in Bowling Green, but the colonists, after having heard the first reading of the public reading of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, July 9th to be precise, marched down Broadway, not far from here, and toppled the sculpture. So instead, our oldest sculpture is this one, George Washington by Henry Kirk Brown at Union Square. Here you see it in the middle of a traffic island on the southeast corner where the streets converge, Lafayette and so on. It later got moved into the park when the park was reconfigured in 1930. But I have three quotes that I'd like to call attention to that kind of embody some of the issues that we face at parks and we face as custodians and keepers of collections in big cities. The first is simply right on that day after that sculpture was unveiled, the New York Herald said, "It is, we hope, the commencement of the good work of beautifying our great metropolis, the people of which are fond of art and willing to encourage it." And that, so they had some sense that this was a city coming into its being and that the art would be a part woven into the fabric of the city. The Board of Commissioners, a few years later, who were being besieged with this brand new park, basically, and people coming up with all sorts of things to muck it up. The Olmsted and Vaux design put out sculptures of various quality. And to prescribe a rule upon which sculptures is to be omitted to or excluded from the park is often a very delicate duty. You can say that again. This is something, a perennial issue that all administrations deal with. And of course, back then, the parks were a tabula rasa. They largely had no art. And so they were a little less judicious, perhaps, in how they place things. And now, of course, as time goes on and sites get encumbered, it's simple physical fact. If you put a piece out on view, then it's taking up that on a permanent basis. You can't do anything else there. We also have our temporary art programs, which address this and allow opportunity to numerous artists and views and aesthetics. And so that's a way we kind of address that. But we're also, for those works of permanent art, of course, some of those very obvious, but maybe not so obvious rules of site specificity, integration with the landscape, a relationship to the community, both local and broader than local significance, all those kinds of items come into play. For the next quote, this is a Supreme Court ruling in 2009, a unanimous ruling defending a small town in Utah against which had been sued because it had rejected, I won't go into the details, a monument for the town green. But essentially it boiled down to this, that there are an infinite number of ideas or things that could be honored and not an infinite amount of space. And so by that, those very rights, cities have to be selective. They're fallible, and yet they make their best efforts and judgments in making those selections. So the summary is right here. While government entities regularly accept privately funded or donated monuments, their general practice has been one of selective receptivity, because city parks play an important role in defining the identity that a city park projects that a city projects, to its residents in the outside world. Cities take care selecting those that portray what the government decision makers view as appropriate for the place in question based on aesthetics, history, and local culture. I'm going to kind of run through quite a number of slides. I'm hoping I'll have a little, in a fairly rapid order, to show you what we do to take care of this collection once we have made those selections and they have come into our custody and our curatorial responsibility as stewards. Yeah, oh, can we turn the lights down? That would be, let's see, and maybe if I can read, I think I can manage it. Yes, uh-oh. Well, while you're trying to figure that out, this slide that I have on the screen simply shows that, again, a few aspects of the collection. Another thing to keep in mind is that monuments have different functions. Obviously, the retention and projection of memory, there we go, a little better. Is the first and foremost, the commemorative function, but it's been our experience that those works that survive, where the energy hasn't dissipated, where people still respond decades or maybe a century later to the work of art, are those that have other meanings for us besides the commemorative function. If its only function is a commemorative function, it's almost inevitable that the monument's impact on us is going to die or diminish exceedingly. A thing of beauty, or a functional object with seating or a fountain, or a symbolism beyond the events it describes, some sort of participatory aspect, you name it. Those they have symbolic function, decorative function, practical function. Here we have two versions of John Ericsson. Who was he? He was a Swedish inventor who ran foundries in Greenpoint and on now where they're building, Hudson River Park's building the Gansevoort Pier Park. He clad the Monitor most notably, they clad the Monitor in the battles of the Civil War. So you have a actual effigy of him in Battery Park dating to 1903, but out in Brooklyn in the 1930s near the other foundry in McGolrick Park, they erected this kind of heroic, strapping male nude figure with his capstan, indicating the maritime aspect of Ericsson's life. So two very different conceptions on the same theme. You have symbolic monuments where they're sort of both very specific site-specific pieces, but also generically symbolic pieces. So on the left, you have the Strauss Memorial, which 100 years later, still is embraced by the community. The figure of memory, it honors very specifically Isidore and Ida Strauss that went down on the Titanic and who lived a block south. And yet it somehow is conceived in a way that you can sit there and contemplate and have broader kind of emotional response to the site, to its beauty, and to the thought of the notion of loss and memory. On the right, there was a quixotic guy named Henry Cogswell who was supporting the temperance movement, and he put in a rather intemperate park, Tompkins Square Park, the temperance fountain. And with the heave the water bearer on top, it has a function. You can go up, and that's a little drinking spout. It's a standard Parks Department drinking spout in that little basin below the Greek temple. So it has a functional aspect also. You can have something that has no graven image whatsoever. Probably the most visited site, except maybe Balto and Charging Bull in our park system, is Strawberry Fields Imagine. All that's there is the word imagine in the pavement and a landscape around it that's integrated with the Olmstedian landscape. There's no graven bronze sculpture of John Lennon. There's no mention of John Lennon. People come from all over the world to participate. On the left, a recent solution to a thorny issue. We were lobbied extensively, and community boards passed a resolution in Manhattan honoring that they wish to have a permanent exhibit, quote unquote, honoring the Central Park Five. And we said, well, first of all, they're still alive, thankfully, and we don't put up objects to living people. But also, what would that be? And how would we do that? And so after much discussion, we came up with what I think is, with the Central Park Conservancy, an elegant solution in which we took one of the unnamed entrances of the park and we named it Gate of the Exonerated. This was in December of this past year, and it coincided with the 20th anniversary of vacating the sentences of those who had been wrongfully convicted. And you can see three of them there. Youssef Salam on the left with the hat, who's now running actually for office. So now on to how do we take care of these things? Vandals mutilate more city statues. That headline is from the New York Times in 1912, the week the Titanic went down. So vandalism is not a new problem. It's not like the city's always getting worse. It always was a tough place. Keepers for monuments will be asked next year. This is a headline from 1936. The WPA the Parks Department had already launched a big project from the WPA to preserve and restore all the monuments. You remember that first sculpture? It was 1856. This is 1936. Well, that's 80 years later was the first sort of concerted effort to take care of anything. And so they started to appoint a small crew under city budget lines, and that's the crew that works with me and under me at Parks to try and take care of this ever increasing collection on they reported to the mayor, and I can't resist reading you Robert Moses's a few outtakes from his letter to the mayor. We have inherited from past administrations some god-awful monstrosities in the form of monuments. We are also the legatees of some very fine things. All of them have been subject to the ravages of time and more or less unrestrained vandalism. Restoration has been a tedious and difficult business. So now on to that tedious and difficult business. Here you can see that those crews from that era working, replacing an arm that had been completely broken away from a nymph figure at the Lorelei Fountain to Heinrich Heine and Joyce Kilmer Park, both of these in the Bronx, actually. In the Bronx Victory Memorial, only 12 years old at the time that they had to completely rebuild the base that supports these kind of marching soldier reliefs in the front. That's in Pelham Bay Park. This is an actual employee card of somebody's name you might recognize who was on that monuments crew. It's Jackson Pollock, the painter. A little known fact, but he worked for 3 months for us as a stone carver's helper and then went to the College of Arts, as it says here, in 1935. And my theory is that he saw pigeon poop on monuments and this caused him to do drip paintings. But anyway. So how do we take care of this collection? You know, in the 1930s and early 40s, they started catalogs of the collection, and then they created diaries of daily work, and created, standard files on each object. So we're after sort of the 1930s, we're able to track the health of the collection in a much greater way. About 20 years ago, we finally got around to mapping the monuments. You can see that map. And on the right, we've been tracking how many maintenances we do. And actually, if you took the previous 10 years, you'd know that around 2002, we were maybe only doing about 150 a year. And now we're getting to like 600 things a year. And so what's happened is we've moved from a sort of triage mode through many different projects. You know, the Adopt a Monument program of the Municipal Art Society, first in the 80s. The Central Park Conservancy dedicated program started in 1991 just to address the collection in that park. And our program that was begun in 97, capital investment on an occasional basis on major things. We have a big project coming up on the Upper West Side. And but then the idea was that let's not just do those conservations, let's try and maintain things as we go forward. So we've moved from a restoration mode to what I would call a preservation mode. We're in all communities. Here you see Saratoga Park and again, that Louise Nevelson, but these two pictures are essentially taken the same week in 2014. That guy on the, just to the right of the Saratoga Monument, that's Mayor Adams before he became vegan and got real fit. He came to that event, and that's Darlene Mealy, who funded the project in Bed-Stuy. It was a World War I monument where the sculpture had been stolen and the reliefs, and we recreated the entire bronze elements through historic photographs. This is my team. I'm going to name them: Victor Riddick, Steve Drago, and John Saunders. John's in the work on our one conservator on city payroll for the park system. And we're doing pointing at the Strauss Monument. Most of these pictures are in the last 4 or 5 years, and most are in the last year. We double up at the Bailey Fountain. This is kind of, this is just done, also got fenced off this week with the arch for repair to the pavement. But the fountain, we would wax it once a year. And Vic, who's in the lift on the right, he says to me, Jonathan, like, we wax it just before they turn on the fountain, and the water comes on it and it wipes off, and it basically takes off all the wax, and then it looks lousy for the fall. So we switched. When we do this work, we like, let's do it right after they turn off the fountain, and it will look really good all fall, winter, and early spring. And then when the water is cascading, nobody will notice anyway because the water is cascading. And so we do the same work, but in a more effective way so that it's looking in a consistent state of appearance all year round. There are small projects that have great meaning, objects within an artwork. And here's just one example. This is the Peter and Willie sculpture based on the Ezra Jack Keats stories in Imagination Playground at Prospect Park. And we're meeting with the artist, Otto Niels. Somebody had stolen the book that the boy holds. And so we actually reached out to the artist, who's now 90. And this picture is 4 years ago. He modeled a new one. We got money from the Ezra Jack Keats Foundation, took it to a small local foundry, B.D. Mackey, put it back, and then you can see John is reattaching it, but we hope in a more secure way. The Monuments Program. Don't go join the Monuments crew if you have a fear of heights. We've trained 130 interns. Many find it's a way of getting hands-on experience in the living lab, as we call it. And we engage in a variety of both inspection and hands-on work. They're on the upper left surveying Blazing Star Cemetery. I think that's been one of the 6 to celebrate too of HDC on Staten Island. Touching up the lettering on the Maryland Monument, Prospect Park, pointing last summer at 80 feet high, the Washington Square Arch parapet cornice, and re-waxing and buffing Richard Hunt's Harlem Hybrid abstract sculpture, all these from the last year. Repainting the Growth, the first Percent for Art project in East Harlem, or in the heart of the city, the crossroads of the world, Times Square, George M. Cohan, hot waxing and repatining the wax on the Cohan sculpture. Other shots of ongoing pointing at the Gay Liberation Monument, again, the Bailey, the Vatican bench, and the Independence flag staff. So this is work that's ongoing on a daily basis. Probably on any day, we're at 3 or 4 sites now doing this kind of, we're trying to essentially address small problems before they become big problems. A full out restoration of many components at the Bryant Monument in 2017, before, after. This was done by our staff and interns. with some support by the Bryan Park Corporation. It took about 6 weeks rather than like 6 years, as some capital projects seem to. And we were able to repoint all the masonry. The alignment, water was coming in, lime was dripping down on the sculpture. And we managed to seal it off with lead caps on the top. We also deal with issues of sort of not strictly conservation, but placement, other environmental concerns. I'm just showing you 2 slides randomly almost, where monuments have been in capital project redesigns relocated, one to the advantage of the sculpture, one not. The Abington Square Doughboy, which faced north towards the club that once commissioned it in a rather forlorn park. The park was redone. There were accusations in the media that we were removing the sculpture altogether and this and that, but in fact, it was turned around and it was placed in a position of greater prominence facing south, where it receives all day long natural sunlight and has become a symbol of the park, and in a park that has seen a great revival. The Nathan Hale, on the other hand, used to stand by Broadway where everybody could see it. In the infinite wisdom of the park designers, it was moved to a central location facing City Hall, but unfortunately you can only see it if you walk the metal detectors to go to City Hall. So in some sense, this, oddly enough, the sculpture of somebody who embodies the notion of liberty has been imprisoned. We have vegetation. We have horticulturalists gone wild, I call it. The Harlem Hybrid, when we encountered it, and by the way, it had also, the district had painted over graffiti. It's meant to be an exposed bronze piece. We removed all the plants, replanted the area, replanted, gravel put down. Actually, we had gravel. This is 2008. We actually replaced the gravel yesterday again at Harlem, and a small monument, but not insignificant, to the Scandinavian community on Staten Island, the Raoul Amundsen Monument. And my staff went there to take care of it, and they said, we can't find it. and now you see it on the right. Monuments that have been fenced off. This is Dawn of Glory there, that shot of that dedication from 1920s I showed you earlier. It's the soul here. This embodies the spirit of the soldier who's been seen into the ever after light of the warm embrace of the divine, I suppose. It's the only sculpture unveiling itself, I call it. And we took away the fence just last year so that you can now approach it. We also conserved it in-house. A few little case studies I'm going to kind of cram in here, if I may. One is the story of the Puerto Rican sun sculpture at 156th Street and Fox in the Bronx. And you see the abandoned housing and people walking the site, and in the lower right, a community garden that actually disappeared after this picture. This is the late 70s that you're looking at. Then the Bronx Venture Corporation, a community development corporation, working with the Housing Authority, did a sculpture commission, and they commissioned Rafael Ferrer to create this 25-foot high painted steel piece called Puerto Rican Sun. You see Gordon Davis, commissioner, on the right with the artist, Tito Puente performing at the dedication, again, after the ribbon is cut. And what happened, it was featured on the cover story of Art and America magazine in 1980, March of 1980. It was unveiled in fall of 79. And there's the picture on the left of Raphael with Nicole Levin, who gave me these photos from the Housing Authority. And then you see a picture of 2003. Well, it didn't look like it was meant to be anymore. He had done a kind of scumbled painting all over it, thinking that, oh, that'll disguise graffiti. But really what happened was the park workers would just take whatever they're using on the benches nearby and they would paint over it. And by the time we showed up in 2003, it bore little resemblance. You can see at that point, the community garden no longer even existed, and they were sitting forlornly on the street corner. So we went at it. I raised some money. And in 2004, we stripped down all the blistered paint overs, got it down to the bare metal. We met with the artist. We got a sign. He didn't want to paint it himself. He said, you guys can paint it. I'll come by. He gave us the palette of colors, which we keep on hand, and we redid it and repainted it. Then the Parks Department got religion, and it decided it's time to take that vacant lot behind it and turn it into a public playground that's usable. And so that's what happened. And so then it became something of an archway into the park. I walked into the park to take this picture, and as I got to the back, I'd never seen what's behind that fence. And this is what I saw, John Ahern and Rigoberto Torres' sculptures that they made attached, a private property and but facing public park. So it's sort of an interesting interaction between an official piece and a non-official artworks at this one site in the Bronx. More recently, we did a project where it's the Louis Hines Monument. Who was Louis Hines? I never heard of him. He had nothing to do with ketchup. He was big in the breweries, frankly, in the German brewery businesses of the city, but then he was appointed first street commissioner of the Bronx when the Bronx got annexed to the city of New York in the 1870s. And after that, and he was responsible for the laying out of the Grand Concourse, this grand urban boulevard. He died at age 31 and was celebrated for having done great deeds in his short life. And they had a figure of fame at the base, was riding to prosperity and progress of the Bronx on the base. You can see in the picture in the lower left, in the center left, where the frond is already missing in the pen, and then it's corroded on the right. It got knocked down in the 70s. The torso, it got taken to a compound in Pelham Bay Park. It was stolen, it turns out, by garbage workers who were using packers to sell scrap metal. And all that was recovered was from the neck to just above the ankles. It sat in our storage for 42 years. But last year, after a 6-year project that we did in fits and starts between everything else, our conservator, John, is a sculptor also by trade. We took a mold off the pedestal in the Bronx. We took it to our shop in Brooklyn so we could create the circumstances, and slowly but surely, month by month, year after year, did little bits, and finally got all the pieces refabricated, repatined, put back on, and reattached it last October, and held an event to rededicate it in December. Many from the community came out, and it was quite a nice event. We had kids from the All Hallows School down the street to speak about what progress and prosperity of the Bronx meant to them. One last sort of case study, I might call it, the Gay Liberation Monument, an example of how a monument in a short period of time, our perceptions and a response to that monument changes over time. You can see George Segal casting from life up in a studio in Vermont in the early 80s. It was a piece that had a rather general dictate to the artist. He was not the first chosen, but he ultimately was the one who accepted the project. Pictures I took on the 4 pictures at the dedication in '92, you can see Mayor Dinkins at the lower left posing with one of the, with Beth Suskind, one of the 2 women who posed for it, who I keep in touch with to this day. The mayor actually got harangued about the domestic partnership law. I remember it was supposed to be this nice sculpture unveiling, and he just got totally harassed. Finally, he's a pretty polite guy. He finally just put down the mic and stopped speaking at this event. This is June of '92. The monument took on a life of its own. At the time it was dedicated, the time it was accepted by the city and made was 1980. I won't go into the details. It's described in various books about why it took 12 years between when it was accepted and made and when it went in. But I was charged only 1 year into my job to put it in by Betsy Gopbaum. It was in a public park in Wisconsin at the time, and we put it in. But what had happened was the AIDS had happened. And so something that was conceived as a celebratory monument to honor the Stonewall Uprising had suddenly become a memorial, especially given George Segal's aesthetic. And so it was perceived in a very different way than had been intended. And it was quite moving for reasons not presumed by the artist or the sponsors. Then, of course, marriage equality came along, and this is a picture on the day of passage of the site. The movie Stonewall came out, and there was criticism that there were little few persons of color who were part of the story told in that movie. So somebody decided to paint the sculpture brown one day. And of course, we're still charged with taking things like that off. And within 3 hours, we actually had the paint off before the press had even announced it had been vandalized. We had gotten that paint removed, which leads me to another thing. Like about 10 years into the life of the sculpture, we were it would take $10,000. We'd have to remove it, send it to the studio. We said, we can't do that on a regular basis. We have a small pool of money. Time's up. They're trying to do. We started a couple minutes late. So can we have that couple minutes? All right, I'm going to move fast. Pulse nightclub. and then it's been federalized. What we've decided though is we now apply a white lacquer on site and we mix in titanium. We do it every year. City still maintains it even though it's a federal site. Just a few last slides to let you know what we're doing in the realm of non-monuments per se. The graveyard shift has become a bigger deal for us. We have quite a number of burial grounds, official and less official. Lower right, a very important site, Old Town of Flushing, where we actually created a memorial to honor those largely indigenous and Black persons who were buried at the site, and it was paved over time, and then it was renovated as a park, and now a site where the burial ground once was has been set aside. We've worked at Gravesend, and in lower left, we worked at the Old West Farms last fall with the Woodlawn Cemetery Bridge to Craft program. We do historic signs. The idea, we've done 2,300 of these. So whether it's Little Red Lighthouse or Little Syria, we're conveying information about these sites through a standardized way of format that we have. We have templates. What was here before? How did this become a park? Who does this honor? You can see at the lower right, the Korean community where we've actually altered. They said that the numbers, the stats within the pavement of that park were incorrect. And I said, well, you approved them, the government of Korea back in '86, and we don't typically alter monuments. I've looked into how much it would cost to change these, update these numbers. It was like $80,000. I said, why don't we just put a sentence in the sign that says, at the time of this monument, these statistics, now they are this, because they'll probably change again, by the way. And so that's what the solution was, and everybody was happy. Slave Market, Old Motor Parkway, gas tanks of Elmhurst, Printing House District, not far from here, Soho Square, Spring Street Park, Old Town, and the Age Memorial, just as examples of some of the fancier version signs we're doing with illustrated illustrations and historic maps. Vandalism, we contend with broadly, some of it specific towards the subject, some of it random, and we still have a dictate at parks to remove it quickly, swiftly, but thankfully, it's been around a long time. These are shots in the 40s and 50s, Washington Square and Bryant Park. Veneration. One of the issues, though, again, we face is that it's not just about that one day a year that people like these show up in a ceremony. It's about how do we sustain interest year round. And again, back to the object, one way we do that is we make sure that the object is in a way it's meant to be seen. And we rely on people like yourselves to cause others to realize that these are things that carry meaning even long after they were commissioned. But that meaning will always be dependent on our personal proclivities. And so here we go. Soldier, statement, author, patriot, but still a disappointment to his mother. So we all bring our biases to how we view objects, and and our baggage and our perspectives. And I'm going to turn back the floor since my time is up. So thank you. And since my time is, and also just since my time is up, I'm happy later. Do I have any time to take a question? I have 3 minutes to take a question. I'll take a question. Yes, in the back. I will. I'm sorry, which memorial? And which memorial? Oh, big. Well, no, we have this is on the north side end of Cabin Plaza, we have the William Gaynor Monument, and the lawn is being resurfaced because it's been a de facto dog run. And the path that leads you down to Dumbo is being redone. So it's basically a park renovation. The monument's looking fine. It's to Mayor Gaynor. It's quite a nice monument actually by Weinman, but so the monument, actually with them, in that instance, as our unit, we just have to make sure the monument is protected while that park in Cabin Plaza is redone. Just another question, yeah.
Have you considered putting QR codes on the monument?
We've considered, but there's some issues with that. First of all, we think QR codes may be ultimately obsolete technology. What do those QR codes link to? We are working with, talking to the Bloomberg people about the Bloomberg app, Connects app, as a way of maybe getting more information out. Of course, we have a lot of web content, so you can find out about these things. We have outside groups who wish to come to us, but the problem there is that we're the city, and this is city property. And we've done it on a temporary basis with like things like talking sculptures or with the Gate of the Exonerated. I actually wrote the sign and it links to a site, but that's managed by the Central Park Conservancy. The hazard is it could start to link to private constituent sites and there's no control over that content. And so that becomes problematic. Also, where do you put the QR code even becomes a little practical issue. Yes, you had a. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the J. Marion Sims, which is the piece I showed in the dedication and the rededication in the 1930s, the actual sculptures at Greenwood Cemetery where he's buried. The site though remains, and it's a % for Art Commission. It's recently been jump started. I think the contract has been signed by the Cultural Affairs Department and the artist Vinnie Bagwell. She frankly has been a little bit, usually these are sort of a process of collaboration and refinement, and it's been a little bit of a tough road without saying anything incriminating, sort of in terms of getting some revisions that will sort of, we think, improve the project and make it integrate with the site. It's moving forward. Yeah. One last question, and I think then we.
Park, the new design they have with area in front of the Grand Plaza with the gynecologist and Kennedy. Good work.
Oh, good. And there's more. I mean, there's like a century's worth of wishes on that. They want to redo the berms and the traffic remains. Okay, one more. Yes. You call our office. We're very transparent. My phone number is 212-360-3410. I think it says on every catalog entry, even on our website, it has my actual phone number and my deputy directors. We have, we are not, you don't have to go through 311. They won't know what you're talking about, first of all. Jack, you had former commissioner of parks, yes.
Current operating budget for Art and Antiquities.
A little hard to say. We've got to, well, I would actually, this is good, some good news. I have made 2 new hires in this administration, the first in 25 years on our crew. So we, I guess if you look at it, we were 40% higher. We went from 3 people to 5 people. This is the crew. But we're also taking on new stuff like the cemetery sites and so on. We get less than $1 million a year for operating. For our total, that's staff and salary and fringe and everything. I do a lot of fundraising. I neglected to say the important point for in the last 30 years or so, we've thought about this issue that after the ribbon is cut, the provision for care should be more explicitly defined prior to placing the artwork. And so for many, if not most, we've gotten endowments which generate enough interest to cover baseline care, rent, like that lift that intern was on at the Washington Square Arts. I could rent that lift for 2 weeks through this fund. I didn't have to worry about going through the purchasing of the city. Yes.
How do people like artists, how do people get their work shown?
That's a separate program. And now my time really is up, but I'll answer that last question. Then happy to speak to people later during the breaks and afterwards. But it's public, it's called Art in the Parks. And we receive, if you go to that on our website, you'll see what we consider. And of course, site specificity is an important aspect to all such projects, community engagement. And we have 85 projects on view this year, temporary art projects. So thanks, everybody. And whoever has that bent sword, I'll want that back.